Let's stand today and take our Bibles, and I'm going to read today a fair amount of Scripture, and the reason I am is because we're going to look at a large swath of the Scripture. It is the story, while other people are engaged, it's the story of one man. And it's found beginning in the book of Genesis, chapter 37, and continues all the way through to the end of the Bible at the end of Genesis at chapter 50. So I'm going to read enough today to give you an overview into Joseph's life, and then as I bring the teaching this morning, we'll fill in some of the events. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report to them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, What is the dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he said to him, Here I am. Then he said to him, Please go and see if all is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Now a certain man found him, and there he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What are you seeking? So he said, I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks. And the man said, They have departed from here, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, Let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brothers listened. Then Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Then Reuben returned to the pit And indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. And he returned to his brothers and said, the lad is no more, and I, where shall we go? So they took Joseph's tunic, killed the kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. And then they took that tunic and they took it to the father, to Joseph's father, and said to him that he died. A wild beast had gotten him, and they found the coat. Now look then at chapter 39, beginning with verse 1. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. Notice verse 2. You'll see this phrase repeatedly through these chapters. The Lord was with Joseph. In his life, you're going to see a lot of ups and downs. This is the phrase that connects everything in his life. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. His master's wife attempts to seduce him, and he resists that, but she falsely accuses him, and now we pick up in verse 19. So it was when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in the prison. Notice verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy. And he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority. Notice again, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it to prosper. And then if you look at chapter 40, the Pharaoh's butler and baker, both of those fall out of favor, and they are put into prison. And there in prison, they have dreams. And Joseph, he interprets those dreams. And to the butler, who was ultimately restored, he says to him, now remember, when you go before Pharaoh, tell him about me, that I've been falsely accused. And I'm not guilty of any of that. And so in verse 23 of chapter 40, you read, yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. And then when you come to chapter 41, Pharaoh dreams. This time the butler remembers. Oh yeah, well, we had a dream and he interpreted this dream, and maybe you should ask him. And so Joseph is brought, and so we're going to pick up in verse 39. Now he interprets Pharaoh's dream. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. And he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put on a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, bow the knee. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. A severe famine comes where Joseph's family is living. And so they leave there providentially by the hand of the Lord, and there is a place provided for them in Egypt because of Joseph. It will begin their time there, which will last for 400 years, and God gave a prophetic promise that said, 400 years you'll be here, and then I will deliver you, and I will give you a land. And so this is the beginning of that period of time. And here's the finish of Joseph's life. If you go to chapter 50, I'll just read the verses at the end of chapter 50 that give you the end of Joseph's life. Beginning chapter 50 and verse 20. Joseph said to his brothers, "But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore do not be afraid, I will provide for you and your little ones." And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. The children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were also brought up on Joseph's knee. And Joseph said to his brethren, "I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Thank you. You may be seated. I'm going to bring a message in two parts. So the overall message is a message I've called Contradictions. What about the contradictions of life? And so part one today, I want to talk about when the dreams of life turn into nightmares. When the dreams of life turn into nightmares. And then next week, I want to talk about what happens in life when it looks as if maybe you've stepped forward in the things that were in front of you, and everything looked like it was there, and you had planned, and provision was there, and then all of a sudden the provision dries up. And so next week I'm going to talk about what do you do when the brook runs dry. So both of these today and next week under this one banner of this idea of contradictions. How many of you have ever had a good idea? Maybe it was a dream. I'm not so much talking about, the dream that you had last night during the night and the one maybe tonight or tomorrow night, but something that sort of possessed you, and it became sort of a vision for you in life, and you were moving toward that dream. How many of you have ever had something like that, and it sort of became the focus of how you lived? Could I see your hands? Yeah. The rest of you backing up on life, or what's going on there? Okay. So, and then maybe you hit some bumps along the way, and things began to happen. Maybe life even unraveled. The story that I'm about to tell you, I want to tell you, is 100% true. There are actually more details to this story that I'm going to share with you, but I'm going to share with you enough that you will get the point. It all started when Becky and I decided to buy an RV. At this point in the first service, she informed everyone that she did not decide to buy the RV. I decided to buy the RV. So I'm using the word we loosely in this story. And seemed like a good idea. You know, because of the churches and things like that, I fly quite a bit. I've flown over 50 times this year, all of it within the U.S. And so we thought, well, we get an RV, you know, we could drive, and we could even take our dog with us. Seemed like a good idea. I calculated in all the hours we go. We sit in the airport, the time we have to drive from the house, and, you know, I added a little more time to make it look better, and just in case there was a delay. And then when we actually, the plane took off and we actually got there, and then we had to go get luggage, and then we had to drive to the hotel or wherever we're going to stay. And, you know, if we had the RV, we'd have our hotel. I mean, sounded like, I convinced myself that this was really a good idea. And besides that, we could see the country. Not that there is much country between here and Southern California, but, you know, the journey along I-10 is not the most scenic corridor in America, but that we'd be seeing the country out there in our RV. So we looked around, and we didn't want a really big one. It was too big. Decided who was going to drive it. And then we decided that we would get a small one. And the small one was small enough that even Becky looked at it and she said, well, you know, she thought she could probably drive that one. So we found one in Baton Rouge, and we went and picked it up, and we headed for our first trip. This is a couple of years ago. This story, you know, I didn't learn enough in the first month. This has taken a couple of years for this story to unfold. And we headed for Phoenix. we were going to meet, and you're all in the dark. We were going to meet our friends there, and and now I'm going to be in the dark, looks like. So we head for Phoenix. We get to Phoenix, and we've never done this before. You know, it has a little, you can look at some videos, tell you how to set things up, because I couldn't remember from the time I picked it up. And so I'm watching little videos. You do this, do this, do this, do this. And so we're all there. And then the first night comes. And the RV is so small that if you want to go to bed, you have to lay the couch down, and the bed falls out of the wall on top of the couch. And that's your bed. And so we also didn't calculate at our age how many times you get up in the middle of the night. And when the bed comes down, there's no aisle space. So all night long we're going, excuse me, would you mind moving over? Do you mind? I've got to get over on this side. Oh, okay. And so we didn't get much sleep. Actually, we didn't get much sleep any of the nights that we were there. We were there a week. Before the week was out, we figured out the RV was too small. And so when we got back to Houston, we're going to sell the RV, and we're going to get a little bigger one. That the bed and the sofa are separate. So we get back to Houston, we sell it, and we buy not a really long one, but bigger than that. And we take one trip to Waco and back and figure out that it's too big for us. It's not going to work. It's too big. We can't get it in spaces, so we decide that we will sell that. And after we sold that one, I thought, you know what might work is one of those vans. You know, it's small, and we wouldn't be staying in it a week or anything like that, but it would be nice to travel in. And, you know, it has a seat in the back. If you push a button, it kind of falls down. So if you want to go back there and sleep, you could do that. And we could use this to going back and forth. Oh, by the way, when we had the big RV, our dog died there. But now we have 2 dogs for the van. So we have 2 dogs. And so we get the van, we've had it a while, and we decide 2 weeks ago, instead of flying to Southern California, we're going to drive. It's going to be great. So we take our 2 daughters, the grandma that you saw up here earlier, take her, take our other daughter, and we take one of our great-granddaughters with us and the 2 dogs. So there's 5 people, 2 dogs in this little van. And we decide we're leaving at 8:30 right after prayer meeting. And Becky thinks we're going to stop, but I'm thinking 5 people, no problem. We could drive straight through. Want to sleep a little bit? No problem. And we'll get there. Won't be much different than if we flew out the next day. Well, 8:30 came and 9:30 came, and we still hadn't left yet. And 10 o'clock came, and about 10:30 or a little after 10, and we left, and we got on the other side of the freeway and realized I'd forgotten something. So I had to turn around, come back, sitting here on the front row. I had to come back and get whatever I'd left. And then our grandson, Connor, he's out in the parking lot. So he comes over and he talks for 30 minutes about nothing to us. So now it's 11 o'clock at night and we're getting on the road. So we drive to Buc-ee's down on I-10 and we pull in the parking lot and we just stay there and sleep for a few hours, get done, back on the road because we're road warriors. We're going to make it. And we drive, on the way Sherry was driving, and I kept telling her, don't drive behind the big trucks because they'll throw a rock and break the windshield. And so then I'm driving out in the middle of the California desert. I don't even see anybody around. There's no truck in front of me. And somebody must have thrown a rock from somewhere and in the middle of the night broke the windshield. So we make it into Orange County. We're planting the church there and finishing up the buildings. And so now it's time to drive home. Our 2 daughters and our great-granddaughter, they abandon the 2 old people and they fly home. And it's Becky and me and the 2 dogs. And so we have a plan. We're going to drive to El Paso. We're going to spend the night. That seemed like a reasonable thing. Well, we get out of Tucson and something happens on the road and everything is stopped completely. You can't go anywhere. We're just sitting there in the middle of the road. So finally we make it to El Paso. It's dark. It's kind of cold. And I'm going to fill up the van with gas, and I go around and I open the side door and we have a boy dog and a girl dog. And the girl dog, she hates to be left behind. So she evidently thought that somehow she wasn't going to get to go. So as soon as I open the door, she comes flying with no leash. She comes flying through the air. And so I lunged to grab her. And when I did, I fell down on the pavement in the parking lot on all 4s on top of her, on top of the dog. It's a great night so far. So we then decide that we're going to drive a little further. You know, we feel okay, so we're going to drive a little further. So I drive a little bit, then Becky decides she's going to drive. By the way, that little couch that makes a bed in the back of the van, I'm not sure, something is wrong because every time you hit a bump, you become airborne. So I'm back there laying down trying to sleep a little bit. Every time she goes over a bump, man, boom, like this. And after a while, I hear Becky call back to me, I think I made a wrong turn. I said, how long ago was that? She said, a while. I said, how long is a while? And we were on our way to Dallas. We saw a part of Texas we've never seen before. We went from El Paso to Fort Stockton and never went on I-10. And we make it back to Houston in 28 hours. Who would want to take a 3-hour flight when you could do that for 28 hours? But that isn't all of the story. That was actually the second van we bought. We bought the little motorhome. We bought the larger motorhome. And then I had this great idea about the van, and the one that I just told you about, we actually had one before that, just like it. Well, we didn't actually, we sort of had it, but we didn't have it, because I found it up in Virginia. And so I took John up there with me to pick it up. We're going to drive it all the way back to Houston, and we get up there, and we go to pick it up. It's hot. It's the middle of the summer. And the air conditioning didn't work. It was a new leftover. I then understood why it was left over. And so they said, well, you just use the dash air conditioning. It'll be okay. And, when you get back, you can have somebody in Houston fix it. I said, well, I don't think that's a good idea. I think you guys should fix the main air conditioner on the top. And so I said, we'll wait. So we waited. And we waited, and we waited the whole rest of the day, and then they closed, and it's still not fixed. So they took us across the freeway. We got a hotel room. We walked over to a place to eat because we didn't have a car. We Ubered, and the next morning we wait again. They're going to have it fixed. By noon, I figure out I don't think these guys are going to fix this. I don't actually think these guys know how to fix this. So I backed out of the deal, which meant John and I now had to fly back to Houston. So we had about 6 hours before we could get a flight. So I said to John, there's a lot of history here. And so why don't you Google whatever the history is locally here, and we'll go see whatever you want to see. You just, it doesn't matter to me. I don't really care. So I don't know where in the world he got this information, but we get in an Uber, and what I discover is we're on our way to a graveyard. Some famous president evidently is buried in this graveyard, and John wants to go see the grave. So I thought, wouldn't there have been some other more historical places we might have gone to visit? But no, so at the graveyard, the Uber driver drops us off at the front gate. We didn't think to ask, how far is the tomb in the graveyard? So he drops us off, and what we didn't know is the graveyard wasn't super wide, but it was really, really long. And so we head into the graveyard looking for the tomb, pulling our luggage in the middle of the summer. It's hot and it's humid. We look like two homeless guys looking for a place to light. After it seemed like a mile to me, honestly. I finally said to John, how far is this tomb? Because if it's much further, they're going to be digging a hole right here for me. Well, finally, we find the tomb. Honestly, it was not worth, if you see John, you tell him it was not worth seeing. And finally, we get out of that, get to the airport, get back to Houston. So wasn't just one van. There were two vans. So, or, your experience might be like this. You want to put that picture up? That is a bald eagle who dropped a cat out of the air on the windshield of that car. How to have a bad day. Explain that one. A bald eagle drops a cat on the windshield of your car. How many have ever had some unexpected times of life? How many have ever had some times when life turned south? And you didn't pick it, it picked you. In Joseph's life, what I want to do today is I just want you to look at some high points. You should, if you haven't, you should take your Bible later and read the whole history, the chronology of Joseph's life. He starts out with a coat of many colors and the favor of his father, and he goes to a pit. He's then promoted, and then he goes to prison. And then he's raised to prominence and power. He's exalted, he's honored, and he is used in his final days to rescue his family and the nation that was there. It seems to me that Joseph's life is a powerful narrative of faith and resilience in the middle of dreams and nightmares. We love the dreams of life. We'd like to get rid of the nightmares. But Joseph's life is a great example of how God uses every circumstance, whether it's good or it's bad, to fulfill his ultimate purpose, even in things that we look at and say that could never be. Romans chapter 8, verse 28 says, we know all things, all things. All things mean all good things, and it means all bad things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. All things. You look at Joseph's life and you see these highs. You see dreams, you see favor, you see authority, you see this special coat that was symbolized his father's special affection for him. You see the lows. You see a pit. You see slavery. You see false accusation. You see imprisonment. The coat and the pit, when you read them in the scripture, illustrate how quickly life can go from a dream and favor to a nightmare in a place that you can't see out of, a pit. Sometimes they aren't overnight, but many times they are quick enough that it seems like that way. Joseph goes from being a favored son to being the property of Potiphar. That was his life. He experienced isolation, injustice, and forgotten promises. But the Bible says, there's that phrase I pointed out to you along the way, that the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. Genesis 39:21. You see Joseph in the middle of adversity. You see him in these places, these negative places, and yet it says the Lord was with him, even in those kinds of times. What you come to the place of realizing is that Joseph's low points were not an end. When you look at the whole story, you see that they were a means to a greater end. God had something in mind for Joseph that not only exalted him, but saved all of his family and saved the nation, and he actually even saved Egypt in the middle of that kind of time. Joseph would actually encapsulate his life in his own words when he comes to the end in chapter 50, verse 20. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So if you look at all the life of Joseph, I want to mention today a few things about that. I think Joseph's life teaches us some very important lessons. The first one being that God uses all of life's circumstances for his glory and for your good. And he's the only one who can do that. He uses all of life's circumstances for his glory and for your good. I think the other lesson you learn is that integrity matters. Joseph was faithful when it would have been easier to compromise. When Potiphar's wife went to seduce him, and she was so persistent in everything there, it would have been easier just to give in, rather than stand as he did and end up in prison. I think the other lesson is your greatest ministry in life will most likely come out of your deepest hurt. Let me say that one again. Your greatest ministry in life will most likely come out of your deepest hurt. You know, we tend to think that people are the most impressed by what we've accomplished, what we've done. That's where they really want to listen to everything and all of that. But actually, most people are more impressed by how you handle adversity. How did you walk through that? When that went really bad like that, how did that happen? You know why? Because they're familiar with adversity too. I guarantee you that for Becky and my story, people are far more interested in the times of our pain, particularly in the times we were in the Philippine Islands, than they ever have been about our success in life. See, we think that our success is what gives us credibility to be a witness. But God says, actually, it's your suffering that gives you that credibility, because in your suffering, you discover some things about God that you won't discover in your success. So, when you find yourself in a pit, as Joseph did, what are some things that you should remember? I'm going to give you these in advance, so that when you're there, here's a list. You find yourself there, so you're not just flailing around. In the middle of the pit, what should you remember? Well, you should remember that God uses the pit times of life to adjust our perspective. Interesting. He uses painful times to get our attention. C.S. Lewis wrote these words: God whispers to us in our pleasure, but he shouts to us in our pain. Pain is God's megaphone. Again, God is the one who brings good out of bad. In the painful times of life, God actually wants to draw you closer to him. What's interesting is that the natural tendency in trouble is to run away from God. The enemy will always say, well, if God were faithful, why would you be there? Why would this happen? Why would a good God let something like this happen to you? Why? So the tendency for us is to run away. But what God actually wants you to do in the middle of your pain is he wants you to run to him. He wants you to lean on him. He wants to hold you in what the Bible would say is his everlasting arms. The 34th Psalm, verse 18 says, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. So when your heart is breaking, when you've been overcome by some trauma, some event, something that didn't go right, some massive disappointment in life. You thought it would be one way and it turned out to be another. When you feel disenfranchised, or someone's done you wrong, and you're living in the middle of all of those kinds of things, you need to know that God is still paying attention to you. He has not turned his head because you're in the middle of your circumstance. God never leaves you nor forsakes you. What should you do in the pit? Well, you probably should acknowledge that you're there. The idea that somehow when life goes south and you start to have problems, you can't admit that you have problems, because if you did, you'd never be a person of faith. That's just a bunch of baloney. That's a real spiritual, theological word you should remember. God values honesty. And it's kind of crazy because we somehow feel like we can tell God that we're actually feeling different than we are. He actually knows, by the way. And it's okay to, out of your circumstance, out of your pain, out of your problems, it's okay to be honest to God. The enemy doesn't want you to ever admit where you are. The enemy doesn't want you to admit that, to ever talk to anyone about it, because the enemy wants to isolate you. It's always his goal in the middle of problems to isolate you, to get you to feel like you are all by yourself, that no one cares, God doesn't even care, and you can't really speak up, and you can't talk about it, and you can't share where you are, and you can't feel what? Maybe disappointment. Maybe in that particular moment, the promise maker, who is also the promise keeper, didn't respond in your moment exactly like you thought he should. And so your reality there, your small r reality, is limited by the earthly vision that you have, whatever that pit happens to be. And you can't see beyond the pit at that particular moment. When you acknowledge where you are and you acknowledge that you have pain, it is not a lack of faith. It is dealing with the reality of the moment. And God can work in the reality of your moment. There is no moment too big for him, no mess that is beyond his ability to reach out his hand and to meet you in the point of your difficulty. In the pit, you should be careful of pit thinking. I didn't get this phrase from AI, I wrote it myself. In the pit, you should be careful of pit thinking, because pit thinking produces a pit mentality, which produces pit talk, which is followed by pit decisions, which lead to a life that is the pits. Let me give you another one. I didn't write this one either. When you clean up and arrange and rearrange the furniture in a pit, you still have a pit. And the only way forward is to somehow get out of the pit and have the one who helps you to help you out of where you find yourself. In the middle of your dark time, in the middle of your nightmare, what we learn from Joseph is that you should practice radical faithfulness, because you probably won't feel like it. Will you be true to what you say you believe? Floyd McClung, who was the head of YWAM for a while, I had Floyd come to speak to the staff at the South a number of times over the years, and I still remember one teaching that Floyd brought to the staff at the church, and he was talking about integrity. And he said, God will set up integrity checks along the journey of life to see if you will be true to what you say you believe. And those integrity checks are times when it's easier to compromise than it is to be radically faithful and preserve your integrity. Another thing we learn is that God uses the painful times of life to increase our faith and our trust in him, and to increase our spiritual stamina. God is attempting to work in you so that when you come to the crisis of life, having done all, you are able to stand in the middle of that time. He has produced something in you that, in spite of the circumstance, You find that you are actually stronger than you thought you were. James chapter 1, verse 2 says, "My friends, consider yourselves fortunate when all kinds of trials come your way. For you know that when your faith succeeds in facing such trials, the result is the ability to endure. Make sure that your endurance carries you all the way without failing, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." It's in the hidden moments. It's in these dark times. It's in the trials that God is building spiritual muscle in you. We don't have any issue at all understanding that if you want to get your body in shape, you have to exercise, and there's some pain involved with that. So we don't have any problem with the phrase, no pain, no gain. But when it comes to the trials of life, as spiritually coming to a mature man to be strong, we want all gain and no pain. And if God doesn't do it that way, we become disappointed in Him. And then what we discover as we walk through these kinds of times of life is that they help us cultivate an eternal perspective, an eternal perspective. Let me have that right there. When you're in a trial in life, what you tend to see is you tend to see the backside of everything. Any of you ever put a sock on backwards? You know, it's a little dark or something you didn't notice. One time I went to an appointment. We lived in this little house, and the closet wasn't in the bathroom. It was right, it had a door right on the side of the master bedroom, and Becky loves the sunrises that come about 11:30. And so for fear of my life, since I'm early, one time I said to Becky, you got to get up in the morning. I mean, the sunrise is absolutely gorgeous. And she said to me, I think tonight I'll just go out and look at the sunset and think backwards. I had no idea what to say to that. So one morning I had a real early breakfast appointment, and so I didn't want to turn the light on. So I'm feeling in the closet for two shoes that feel the same. I got them, put them on, got in my car, drove the appointment. I'm sitting there at the table, and I looked down, and I had one black shoe and one brown shoe on. They felt the same. The circumstances of life tend to, in fact, just another one. Becky told, just a few days ago, she came in and said, I got to change my shirt. I said, why? She says, I've been wearing it backwards this morning. It's true. That's a true story. And life tends to look like this. And what we don't realize is that even when life looks like this, God is actually doing something that will look like this. It's just that we're seeing the other side of it at that particular moment. How is it that you navigate the journey of life when you know there are going to be these times? Everyone has them. Becky and I have lived long enough to know that if you haven't had any yet, it's not because you're special. Because you are special, God's going to let you have some. Because He's going to use them to cook you and get you done and shave off some of the rough edges and get you to where you're trusting. And to get you to this place. It is a place that North American Christianity could learn a lot about. It would help many Christians not have to run to the drugstore for the pill that has to give them another reality in crisis moments. If you learn to have an eternal perspective. This life is temporary. It's going to end. Whether we all go by way of death or Jesus comes. In fact, this life is not really the real life. Heaven is the real deal. And so how you live in life is if one eye is on where you are, because you're going to be faced with the reality of whatever it is you happen to walk through, and you look at that, what helps you navigate that, if you keep another eye on something that is not of this world, of another world, you are on your way to a better place. We're so focused on the things of this life, trying to get ahead, trying to make everything better, trying to get rid of all of our problems, all of these other things, so busy, that heaven becomes a byword. Not a bad word, just a byword. And that, oh yeah, it's an oh yeah word. When the anticipation of heaven was to be a major part of a believer's life. If you look back at Christian history, and you look back in eras of time in which Christians didn't enjoy the blessings we have today, they didn't have prominence, they maybe didn't have any possessions, maybe they were hunted and persecuted, as those who lived in the catacombs in the time of Rome. They had nothing of this world that would matter. And so if they were to have a hope in the middle of that kind of time, it had to be a hope in something beyond this life. The slaves in America had the same issue. And they were property, as Joseph became. Had children, but their children would be owned as they were. And so the cycle of life would have been repetitive. And until there came independence, there was nothing to live for. How do you have hope in the middle of that kind of time? I was sitting in a class when I was taking my doctorate, and one of the professors who became a friend of mine, on one session, he talked about this. He was an African-American brother, and he talked about what the American church is missing because it is so focused on what we can touch and feel. And he talked about the slaves. And he said, wherein do you find hope when you have nothing? You don't own anything at all. You are in fact owned. It's something so foreign to our minds that even those, I think, who say they understood how all of that worked, I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure it's completely true unless you actually experienced it. Doesn't mean you couldn't know some things about it. And Ken said, they found hope in God. They found hope in another day, another world beyond this life. And so as they lived this life, they would have their eye on another one because they couldn't see this world changing. They had no hope. Well, 10 years, 20 years, things will change or this or that or whatever. They had no way. They were helpless to change the day. And out of that came what we call the Negro spirituals. And they were songs that pretty much every one of them were about this old world and the pain and suffering and no hope in this life. But there's a better day. A better day coming. It wasn't rooted in the next election or hoping that someday they would hit the jackpot. It was rooted in another world. And so those songs were the cry of a people. They weren't just to sing. They were what anchored their lives, not in this world, but in a world that was yet to come. Someday, when this life is over, I'll fly away. Someday, the tribulations and trials and everything I've walked with will be done. And someday I'll be with the Lord in heaven. We could learn a lot in this modern generation from those who walked before us with a sure hope. When you find yourself walking through the difficulties of life, cultivate an eternal perspective and trust the one who is weaving the pattern of your life together. He is in fact a good God. He is a promise maker. He is also a promise keeper, and He holds time in His hands. He holds your time in His hands, and He is working all things that concern you together for good because you love Him. You can trust the promise maker. Lord, would you come today to people in this room who are walking through difficult times? Would you help them in a better way than I've been able to know that whatever mess they're in is not the end of their story, but it is an invitation to lean on you. Would you come today in the middle of the closing moments of this service? Would you speak by your Spirit into people's hearts in a way that there's just this fresh assurance? Would you let your word be true? I will lift up my head to the hills, from which comes my help. That you, in fact, are the maker of heaven and earth. And would you come now to minister as only you can to people in time of need? As those in the dark moments of our own history, of our nation, who walked in the physical times of life without any hope, they had, as I said, an anchor in something eternal. It was something that we can sing about ourselves. It is a portion for you in your difficult time. It is these simple words: God is here. Let the brokenhearted rejoice. God is here. Let the sick say, I am well. It can be sung in this room, but it can be sung anywhere else, even in the middle of a pit. And in the middle of a circumstance that is so black you can't see your way out or understand how anything would ever change. You can remember the life of Joseph. Remember that somehow this is the God who even in those dark times can work on your behalf. We're going to sing this chorus just before we go. And how do you get out of a pit? You take a step. You take a step. Maybe you're in a place and it just seems permanent. Nothing's ever going to change. I can't tell you today about the duration of time for your situation. What I can tell you is that wherever you are and whatever you're walking through, this is the eternal God who knows exactly where you are. I'm going to ask you today, as we sing, I'm going to have you all just stay seated. But as we sing these words, and today, though we've sung this many times, today it's your song. It's your song. And in just the sense of that moment, as in the middle of your circumstance, you've made it yours, I'm going to ask you to stand. Now, it doesn't mean the whole congregation needs to stand. It doesn't even mean that anyone needs to. But it's a moment in which I believe God, in just the next moment, wants to meet people personally in this room. God is here. If that's where you are, and you sense that encounter, I want you to, it's that step you take, and you stand today in His presence.
God is here.